Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. Let's get started and look into the first article. The first article says data law delay. Let us try and understand what is this article all about. We have the government of India which has recently said that it is withdrawing the personal data protection bill. In this article, we will try and understand what is the historical picture of the data protection bill. We will also understand why has the government withdrawn this legislation, and we will also understand what is the way forward. First up, we have to understand the origins of this legislation. When we speak about the data protection, what is data protection? Your data, which is the information, the personal data of yours, has to be protected. So in order to protect it, what we require is a legislation. How is this data protected? Who will have this data? How is this entity going to safeguard the data? All of these will be regulated under the data protection bill. This was introduced by the government of India back in the year 2019 as a legislation. Why did the government of India introduce this legislation? That is because we have to go back to the year 2017. There was a landmark judgment delivered by the Supreme Court of India in Justice K.C. Puttaswamy retired versus the Union of India. According to this judgment, it went on to say that right to privacy is very intricate and it is part of Article 21. So it is this judgment which clearly said that right to privacy is also part of Article 21 and this needs to be safeguarded. As a result, the government feels that a lot of data is being taken by number of social media platforms like Facebook, like Twitter or YouTube or many other entities where they are violating the privacy of an individual. So in order to safeguard the personal data, what they required was a framework. So what do? They appoint one of the committees called as the Sri Krishna Committee. So the retired Supreme Court Justice Sri Krishna was appointed to formulate a regulatory framework for the data protection. So the first happens to be the judgment, that is the KS Puttaswamy judgment. Privacy was identified as an aspect of 21, so they appoint a committee to give the government a framework. So what did the Justice Krishna Committee do? The Justice Krishna Committee not only looked at different aspects of data protection, but it also compared what was happening elsewhere as well, in the United States of America, in the European Union countries, and ultimately it delivers a framework to the government of India. On the basis of this framework, the government introduces what is called as the data protection bill. The government introduces this data protection bill with number of features. However, we have Justice Sri Krishna who goes on to say that this data protection bill initiated by the government has also violated the regulatory framework given by the Sri Krishna Committee. So what do? They indeed refer it to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. The Joint Parliamentary Committee again looks into this particular legislation and they also make a lot of recommendations to the government. So now in the present situation, the government feels that the recommendation given by the Joint Parliamentary Committee is too much, and instead of going up with all these amendments, why not introduce a new legislation? So the government now feels that the bill that was proposed in 2019, which was given to the Joint Parliamentary Committee, the Joint Parliamentary Committee looks into this entire legislation. There were too many recommendations. So instead of bringing amendments to this legislation, we will come ahead with a new legislation, says the government of India, and which is why it has also withdrawn the current legislation which was given to the Joint Parliamentary Committee. So why did the government withdraw? That is because the government retaining its access to the data has withdrawn the bill now, citing the significant number of amendments, recommendations and corrections suggested by the Joint Parliamentary Committee. The Joint Parliamentary Committee's 542-page report has 93 recommendations, 81 amendments, and members have suggested 97 corrections and improvements to the bill. One of the key recommendations is widening the ambit of the bill to cover all data instead of just personal data, thus moving it considerably away from its Puttaswamy origins, which is why the government feels that there are too many recommendations. So instead of amending this, why not come up with a new legislation taking these recommendations into the picture? That is why the government has withdrawn this particular legislation. What does the bill say on data localization? When you look into the personal data, What is personal data? It is your data, it is my data, it is sensitive data about our blood groups, about our health history, it is also about our Aadhaar details, so on and so forth. So the personal data was defined in the bill as any characteristic, trait, attribute or any other feature information that can be used to identify a person. The bill also identified a subcategory of sensitive personal data such as details on a person's finance, health, sexual orientation, practices, caste, political and religious beliefs, biometric and genetic data. All these data would be collected and would be safeguarded under the data protection bill. It also notified what is called as the critical personal data. It is where the personal data as may be notified by the central government in the near future, and this critical personal data can be stored and processed only in India. So the data which is called as a critical personal data will be categorized by the central government. So whatever the central government feels is critical personal data, such a data cannot be exported to another country. Such a data cannot be put up on the servers of some other country. Instead, such data will only have to be in India and in Indian servers, said the data protection bill. The bill also stated that sensitive personal data can be transferred abroad for processing, but a copy of it must be kept in India. Let's say for example, Facebook is where you have all your data. Let's say you've given your date of birth, you've given other interests of you to the Facebook. So what is Facebook doing? It is keeping all this data on the servers in United States of America. So apart from keeping this data on the servers in United States of America, it should also have a replica, a copy of it, another copy of it in the servers of India. Apart from you exporting this data where you have this data in the servers of United States of America, also make sure that this data is also available in India. So this legislation clearly said on one side you cannot export, put out the critical personal data outside the country, but if there is sensitive personal data you can have a copy of it in your servers, but at the same time you need to also have a copy of it in the Indian servers. This is where number of tech industries were not happy with it. This is where the Indian startups were also not happy about it. Why? That is because when you consider the Indian startups, they personally felt that if we are collecting a lot of data, yes, we would be having one copy of it in United States of America or any other servers in any other country. So this is present. Added to it, we have to keep a local copy. If we have to keep a local copy, the Indian startups do not have much of the finances, and at the same time they do not have the required infrastructure. They bank on some of the international companies, so they would not be able to feed, they would not be able to spend, they do not have enough finances, and as a result they would be making a huge losses, say the startup industry in India. So because they have to keep a copy of it in India, if they're using the server space, this ultimately means that there is a lot of data that is collected for which they have to start spending. If it is elsewhere, the amount of money that they would be spending would be comparatively less, says the startup ecosystem in the country. Added to it, if you consider number of countries, let's say United States of America or United Kingdom, they also have a strong technological lobbying group as well. Let's say Facebook or Google, or you're speaking about any other company for that matter which has its headquarters located in United States of America, they were also apprehensive as well. Why were they apprehensive? That is because they also felt that if they have to save the data at the local levels in India, they have to spend extra as well. They have to make more use of finances as well. This is where the tech industries, their lobbying groups in United States of America were not happy with this proposal given under the data protection bill. One of the JPC recommendations would also have been particular concern for the social media companies, as it sought to move them from the category of online intermediaries to content publishers, thus making them responsible for the post that they post. This basically means if you consider the present law, we have something called as the intermediary. Who is this intermediary? Facebook happens to be an intermediary. What exactly happens? Let's say for example, you are an individual. You as an individual, you would want to post something. This individual, if he posts something on FB, Who will be held liable? It is only this individual who will be held liable, because it is this individual who has posted something on Twitter or on Facebook. So there is no liability of this intermediary. But if this intermediary is converted into a content publisher, so then all the responsibility will shift to this intermediary. They have to have a constant vigilant eyes as well. They also have to make sure that their algorithm is in such a state that it is able to filter out the hate speech or any other negative comments. So in this particular case, if they become the content publishers, they have to spend more on the change of algorithm. This ultimately would be problematic for these technological intermediaries. As a result, they were once again not happy with it. So taking care of what was happening with the recommendations given by the JPC, the Joint Parliamentary Committee, added to it, the tech industries had their own set of fears and concerns. Other concerns were all taken into picture, and now the government decides that we will be withdrawing this bill and coming up with another bill proposal so that all this is accommodated and ultimately put into practice. But this is where number of political commentators have also criticized as well. Why? That is because whenever there is a legislation that is introduced into the parliament, a lot of research goes into it. There was Sri Krishna committee which was appointed. So whenever a committee is appointed, the government also allocates a certain money for this particular committee so that they can go and interact with multiple people. So one side, what we are investing is a lot of money. On the other side, what we are also investing is a lot of time to give the recommendations. But in the present situation, all the hard work that have been put by the Sri Krishna committee, this eventually came in the form of a bill. The bill goes into the Joint Parliamentary Committee, and now all the recommendations of the Joint Parliamentary Committee will be considered in the near future. You could have introduced the law, and if people were not happy with it, you could have introduced the amendments. But when you're coming with the legislation which you're not sure when you're coming up with, what we will have is a lacunae for the data protection. The judgment was given in 2017, the framework was given in 2018, yet we do not have the data protection law is the first major criticism. So what we have in the present situation is a lacunae, and that is we do not have the data protection law, says this article. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says, how will the 5G auction impact the sector? Let us try and understand what is this article all about. When we speak about the 5G technology, we have discussed about what is 5G technology, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages in the past, and the link for the same will also be given in the description box. What is the focus of our today's discussion? Recently, what we had is the spectrum auction. In the spectrum auction, you had number of stakeholders who came up to the spectrum auction. They have invested a lot of money and they were able to buy the spectrum as well. So the auction of telecom spectrum, including bands for offering 5th generation technology services, concluded, drawing record bids exceeding 1.50 lakh crore. Reliance Jio emerged as the top bidder, staking claim for a period of 20 years to 24,740 megahertz of spectrum. Bharti Airtel stood second with 19,868.8 megahertz worth spectrum, and Vodafone Idea third with 6,228.4 megahertz spectrum. So it is in this particular backdrop we have to understand what these telecom entities, companies bought in the spectrum auction, and we have to understand what is the future potential of the 5G services in the country. First we have to understand is with respect to the spectrum. When it comes to the spectrum, we have three bands of spectrum. One is what is called as low band, followed by the mid band, and what we have is the high band. When it comes to the low band, it constitutes 600 megahertz. Then we have 700, 800, 900, 1800, 2100, 2500 megahertz. When it comes to mid band, what we have is 3300 megahertz. And when it comes to high band, what we have is 26 gigahertz to 1 gigahertz equals 1000 megahertz frequency bands which were put up for auction. what is this low band spectrum, what is this mid band spectrum, what is this high band spectrum. Let us try to understand. When it comes to the low band spectrum, it is popular for providing wider coverage. However, the speed and latency might just be an incremental upgrade over 4G. What do we mean by it? When it comes to the low band, it provides broader coverage across hundreds of miles. When it comes to the 5G, the low band spectrum allows operators to provide wide coverage even in the rural areas. So because this 700 megahertz is able to provide even in the rural areas, many companies started focusing on the 700 megahertz. So basically, the problem with the low band spectrum is that its quality in performance will depend on the proximity to the cell site. Let's say, for example, you have a huge tower here. If you're standing next to the tower, you will be able to generate the speed. But what if you're miles apart? In that particular case, yes, you would have the speed, but it is not equivalent to what you have when you're close to this tower. So basically, the closer you are to the tower, if you're using the low band, much will be the speed. But if you're far away from the tower, in that case, you will not be able to get the required speed. However, when you consider the 700 megahertz or the low band, what is the advantage? You would be able to give network connectivity to far off places with just one tower. With just one tower in place, you would be able to provide network connectivity to far off places, and whenever there is a building or there is a tree, there is less interference when it comes to the low band. When it comes to high band spectrum, it can provide speeds of up to 2 gigabits per second, but it is unable to travel long distances, at times less than a mile. So what is the difference between low band and high band? On the low band front, you would be able to reach large distances, but speed is comparatively less. But when it comes to high band, the speed will be phenomenal, but it will not be able to reach the far off distances. When it comes to a tree or when it comes to a building, there'll be a lot of interference and speed drops when it comes to the high band spectrum. So basically, this high band spectrum is susceptible to interference from buildings and trees than the low and the mid band. Then finally, what we have is the mid band spectrum, which falls somewhere between the two. It can carry sizable data over long distances and also maintain increased speeds as well. Now, if we have to consider in the present auction, most of the companies did invest on the 700 megahertz front. As we just discussed, this happens to be on the low band front. But why did the companies invest in the 700 megahertz spectrum? When you go back to the year 2016 and 2021, for the same 700 megahertz spectrum, they did not make the investments. But why did they make the investment right now? That is because the initial payment that they had to pay has been comparatively reduced, and added to it, the 700 megahertz is usually sold at a higher price. That is because it provides better network coverage, and it has also got the ability to penetrate the buildings efficiently. When we speak about densities, let's say for example, we have Bengaluru, we have Delhi, we have Mumbai, or in Kolkata, it is very dense. So if we are making use of the 700 megahertz, what we would be able to provide is higher connectivity, which is why most of these companies have invested on the 700 megahertz. That is because in the previous instances that the amount that they had to pay was comparatively higher. This has been reduced right now, and now they have invested more on the 700 megahertz component. This time Jio emerged as the sole entity to spend 39,270 crore on the premium band, known to improve indoor and rural coverage as well as possessing the ability to penetrate through walls and properties more efficiently. Added to it, apart from the 700 megahertz, they've also invested on 3300 megahertz band, which will be crucial for the 5G technology deployment going forward. And they've also invested on 1800 megahertz band, which stems from the rising mobile broadband usage and thus the need for improving the network capacity. And when we speak about the 5G, why are they going for the auction? That is because it will provide faster data speeds on the mobile networks, better quality video calls, instant movie downloads, online gaming with much advanced special effects, which is why these companies are investing on this front. What is the post auction outlook for the industry? When we look at the telecom sector, telecommunication in India is price sensitive and competitive market. The sector is capital intensive and has to consistently invest in upgrading technologies and improving the services. So, as of now, all these companies have invested a lot of money as well, and there is a lot of competition as well. Each of these companies are reducing their tariffs just to attract the people. So, as of now, it looks like there is a cutthroat competition, but in the near future, now it looks like there is a lot of stress in the telecom sector, but in the near future, once all these competition settles, they would be able to make a lot of profits. Added to it, what is the debt situation right now? Notwithstanding the debt levels, the cash flow being generated from the business was also improving in the telecom sector. The latest spectrum auction too would improve the sector's operational viability by lowering the repayment burden. And in the year 2022, for the first time ever, there was no mandatory requirement to make any upfront payment. What do you mean by upfront payment? Whenever they are going for an auction, they have to pay some amount of money. But in the present situation, the government has not taken any upfront payment. The payment for the spectrum could be made in 20 equal installments in advance at the beginning of each year. So they need not to have to pay at the time of the spectrum auction, but they can go ahead and pay at the start of the year on an equal installment. This could potentially lower the operating cost for the telcos, in turn providing an opportunity to spur their respective average revenue per user. This happens to be the outcome with respect to the recent 5G spectrum auction. To understand what is 5G, what are the advantages and challenges, we've already recorded a video. The link for the same will also be given in the description box. Now let's look into the next article. This article says Rajasthan's nadis and insurance against a dry summer. The article here is speaking about nadis. What are these nadis? Nadis are also called as talabs. These are nothing but the ponds where in the region of Rajasthan. These are nothing but the shallow depressions across the rural landscape where in the arid regions of Jodhpur and Barmer districts. So popularly called as nadis or ponds are nothing but the shallow depressions in the rural landscape. What is the significance of these ponds? When you consider the region of Rajasthan, it has a very hot and humid climate, and there are times where this particular region is deficient of water. So what we require is one storage area in the form of a pond which helps in storing of water, and eventually this will help in quenching the thirst of the cattle and the human beings. What is the significance of these tanks? The water that is collected will quench the thirst of people, cattle and the wild animals during the dry months. The nadis have been part of the rural life for ages, and the rural communities store rainwater in these structure with the application of traditional knowledge, and whenever there is a drought or water is not enough, they make use of these ponds. What are the challenges? Several of them have fallen into despair, while others leak because of the cracks in their embankment walls, and villagers will have to put effort to maintain them or renew the benefit. So going forward, the village and the panchayat based systems managing these local natural resources should be strengthened without delay, and they have to safeguard these nadis, says this article. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says study of rock agama gives insight into urbanization and conservation. What is this article speaking about? The article here is speaking about peninsular rock agama. This happens to be a type of the garden lizard that has a strong presence in the southern India. What are the characteristics? This happens to be an animal strikingly colored in orange and black color. Where are they found in India? They are significantly found in the southern part of India. In cities, they are found in rocky places and warm spots. Why are they found in the rocky spots? That is because they do not generate heat of their own. They require heat or the warmth from the external surface. So because these rocky surfaces provides them the warmth, that is why they are present in the rocky areas. What does this species indicate? This species basically indicates the warming, and at the same time it also denotes how the food web is changing in this particular area. As we initially discussed, it is present in the rocky areas, it is present in the warm surfaces. So if large number of these species are present, it means that particular region, the city is also warming up, is one such indication. This also indicates the food web as well. When we speak about insects, insects are critical components of a healthy ecosystem. They provide many services including the pollination, and these insects are eaten by the lizards. These lizards are also eaten by the snakes and the dogs as well, ultimately signifying what we have as a food web. On one side, it also speaks about urbanization, the rocky areas, and it also speaks about the food web. Whenever we speak about biodiversity conservation, we speak about safeguarding the tigers, the elephants, so on and so forth. Added to it, these small species are also significantly important and we have to safeguard them, says this article. So, this article currently goes on to say we have to retain the rocky patches even while reviving the landscapes by planting more trees, says this article. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the next article. This article says Indian Virtual Herbarium, biggest database of country's flora, is a global hit. What are we speaking about? We are speaking about Indian Virtual Herbarium. This happens to be the biggest virtual database of flora in the country, and it gives us all the details of about 1 lakh plant specimens that are present on the database. This was developed by the scientists of the Botanical Survey of India. So this can be very important from the preliminary examination point of view. What does it denote? Each record in the digital herbarium includes an image of the preserved plant like as shown in the image, the specimen, scientific name, collection locality, collection date, collector name as well as the barcode number. The digital herbarium includes features to extract the date state-wise, and users can search plants of their own stage, which will help them identify regional plants and in building regional checklists as well. So basically, this is a database, a virtual database where you would have what is this plant species all about, where is it found, what are the characteristics and all that, so that this helps in safeguarding this species. It is this that we have to understand with respect to this article. Now let's look into the mains practice questions. Write a note on the journey of the Personal Data Protection Bill and explain why the government withdrew the bill. Next one, will 5G launch in India help improve the debt situation of telecom providers? Critically examine. Please write all your answers on the comment section, peer review, and to give positive feedback to your friends' answers. So this is it for today. Thank you for watching. All the best.